Oftentimes, people talk about the therapeutic value of role-playing games and how gaming can help people achieve so and so and so and help with so and so and so. Well, let's clarify a few things about therapy and role-playing games. Firstly, roleplay was invented by Jacob Moreno, not Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson when they published or researched D&D at all. Jacob Moreno was a Romanian-American psychiatrist and psychologist that invented psychodrama in the beginning of the 20th century. So role-playing has been around for an insanely long time before role-playing games arrived. True that Gygax and Arneson invented role-playing games, but not role-play at all. Role-play indeed has been used as a therapeutic tool for, well, nearly a century now, I would say. However, that comes with some pros and cons. Disclaimer, I am not a psychologist, I am not a psychiatrist, but I am a psychotherapist. I did practice with Relate in the UK for a number of years, and I also have qualifications from an organization called HAPAS on relationship counseling, a forum Relate, and alcohol treatment from HAPAS. I did person-centered approach, psychodynamics, and systemic approaches that basically qualified me to deal with people and enable people who had that sort of issues, relationship issues and alcohol abuse or abuse issues in general. But I am not a psychologist. I cannot diagnose, I cannot prescribe, and I am definitely not a psychiatrist because that requires way more study than I can. So I do have a good knowledge of the therapeutic relationship and how therapy works, but I am not a psychologist, okay? So what I'm about to say is all from the point of view of the psychotherapist or the counselor. Right, firstly, you are as a GM, you are not a therapist. For therapy, psychotherapy to take place, there has to be a contract. And this is non-negotiable. You cannot, it's incredibly unethical to try to impose therapy on people who are playing the games with you. It would be unethical for me to impose therapy on people who don't want to have it. That only happens in some extreme cases like domestic violence, murder, rape, that sort of thing, when court can indeed, and they do, order people to go through therapy in order to assess whether they are able or safe to come back to society. But overall, it is very unethical to try to impose therapy on people. Why do I say this? Sometimes when people like me, when social justice warriors talk about don't bring rape onto the table, don't bring traumatic situations onto the table, and if people tell you stop this, a lot of times we hear things like, oh, but exposing people to these kind of situations can help them get over them. It's not the GM's call to do that. If anything, it would be the victim's call to do that, to want to expose themselves to that representation of a trauma, to actually try and learn how to deal with it. But it's not up to the GM. And a gaming table, unless it has been specifically created and managed and supervised to do that, is not the place to do it either. You as a GM are responsible for making sure that people have fun, and you're responsible for their safety. And it is not down to you to decide when somebody with a trauma should be exposed to the representation of that trauma. Ever. No questions asked, unless that person specifically says yes. In which case, it has to be done carefully, because from that moment on, it's not even about the game. It's about how that person is going to manage that situation, those reactions. And it is you, as a GM, as a psychotherapist, how are going to help them manage that. It's not even, you should not be influencing whether they go one side or another. You're just there to enable them the exploration of that kind of situations. And it is a very difficult thing to do. It requires an insane amount of empathy. It requires an insane amount of introspection. It requires an insane amount of supervision. No psychotherapist ever if they follow any kind of ethical practice, will be without supervision, because due to projection and counter-projection and reflection and counter-reflection, you will also suffer, you will also feel, because you have to empathize with that person, and that will affect you. Because we have biases that we just cannot get away from. Your views, your ideas, your perception, your sympathy could lead you to actually try and influence that person in one way to another, which is why psychotherapists have supervision, because we talk with our supervisors about how we feel about those sessions, those situations, those patients, those clients, not patients, that's the wrong word. A gaming table is not the place to do that, unless it has been specifically created for that reason. If you want to help people around the table to actually explore things like empathy, that's brilliant, but do it through the game, not through trauma. Put people, their characters, not people, put their characters in a situation and try to help other players, other characters, to actually empathize with the situation of that character. That doesn't mean it has to be traumatic at all. It can be absolutely anything: a bard's performance, a paladin losing a battle or winning it, a mage learning a new spell, an investigator who found a book and cannot really translate it. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be trauma. So when you say that going through rape is just a representation and people, it can help them, that's not for you to decide. That's for the person to decide. And that person has to give you permission, has to consent to that. Because otherwise, you're just following your own agenda. And that is not acceptable at all. So, if game can be therapeutic, is not an excuse to say, I'm going to add whatever I want to the game, and I'm going to bring my own idea of therapy to the game. And I tell you something else that you are not going to like. If you are not a therapist, don't talk to me about games being therapy, because you have no idea what you're talking about. Literally, you have no idea what you're talking about. Learning to be a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist takes years. Not just study, but also practice. You don't get a title, you don't get a diploma and suddenly, boom, you're a great psychologist, you're a great psychiatrist. It doesn't work like that. So no, your games are not therapy unless you set them up to be, in which case, it's not really longer a game. The game is not the focus, fun is not the focus, the therapy is. And you have a lot of work ahead of you. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Please leave me your comments down there. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and I will talk to you very soon. Take care.